Welcome to Sausage on a Fork, a podcast dedicated to the UK's longest running children's drama programme, Grange Hill. My name's Neil, and in each episode I'll interview a former cast member about their life before, during and after their time on the programme. Okay, so welcome to the next episode of Sausage on a Fork, and I am absolutely delighted to say that I have been joined by none other than Steven Hammett, who played Dudley Wesker. Steve, welcome to Sausage on a Fork.
Hello, Neil. Thanks for having us.
Not a problem. So what we'll do, Steve, is we'll start this episode the way we start every episode. And if you can tell us how you first got into acting.
So I went to the Anna Share Theatre with my sisters. You've probably had some people on here that have mentioned that before. You're probably familiar with them. They were sort of, I suppose, like the working class stage school for people that couldn't afford to actually go full time to your sort of Sylvia Youngs and Italia Contis, etc. But there was a 5-year waiting list to get into it, and it was literally just around the corner from me. So my mum signed me and my sisters up when we were all quite young.
Right.
I think I'd always had a bit of a flair for stuff, I think, in school plays and things, but I was more really into the music side of things. So I think my mum had always sort of encouraged us to do that. And yeah, I think one day you just get a letter through the post saying you're now at the Anna Share Theatre. So you just, go to your weekly sessions and it was all from there, really.
Yeah. And did you get much acting work from there?
I did, actually. So one of the first things I did was actually, which we'll probably talk about later, was actually the reason I managed to get onto Grange Hill. But one of the first things I did was Jack and Ori. So I did quite a few sort of radio plays and things like that. I did and sort of bit parts, extra work and things. I was on the bill. I had a couple of lines and stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I did a Jack and Ori, and the director at the time was Philippa Langdale,
right.
Who later on sort of became a director at Grange Hill,
Uh-huh.
and the producer was Di Jones, who ended up becoming sort of the producer for Grange Hill.
Yeah.
And I think just through that, they were both at the audition when I went for Grange Hill. But
right.
yeah, I did that. Just a few little bits and pieces, some independent films and things like that. I wasn't constantly working, but yeah, certainly did a few bits before Grange Hill.
Yeah, and you did. There was one thing I noticed, which was a film for Screen 2 called The Grass Arena.
Yeah, that was one of the first ones.
The cast for that looked incredible, to be honest. Mark Rylance and Pete Postlethwaite and Amanda Mealing was in that. I have to mention Amanda Mealing just because she was in Grange Hill in her very, very early days of her career as well. Okay, then. So Grange Hill, so you mentioned there about, there was people there who sort of knew you and recognised you at your audition. So you obviously think that obviously helped.
Oh, I did 100%. So I think I was sort of quickly starting to learn that I wasn't really so much into the acting, more into the music.
Right.
And I think that when you start to get into what was the group called the Young Professionals in Anna Share, which are generally the ones that have got work, they're always on a Saturday.
Right.
And it always seemed to clash when I want to go and do things with mates and play football and do whatever else. So they used to have this notice board where they would put everyone that was going for a certain audition, and occasionally you'd see one for Grange Hill that would have a whole load of names on it. And I think one day I was at one of the sessions, whether in two minds to think whether I wanted to stay, and I looked on the wall and saw my name wasn't on there. So I went back and called the agency and just said, look, I'm not really interested in doing this anymore. Like, it's taking up my Saturdays. So they just said, look, there's a Grange Hill audition next week. Can you go to that before you make up your mind? So I was like, okay. So it was really cool. It was done in a park, I think, over in St James's Park or something like that. We all just sort of sat on the grass doing an audition. And when I turned up, Di Jones was there, and she sort of flipped things to me. I didn't know you was here, Steve. And they sort of took me to the side and said, well, can you read these few lines for us? At the time, I was going through a bit of a disastrous hair phase of experimenting with mullets and ponytails and all sorts. It was quite fledgling at the time. And by the time I'd got back home, they'd already called and asked me not to cut my hair.
Wow.
And originally it was only planned to be, I think, for 1 or 2 episodes. So they'd sort of said to me, it's a non-permanent character, but if you can just not cut your hair for 6 weeks until we get you. And I think that was how I ended up with that haircut.
Because it is
kindly referenced in your clues.
It is one of the greatest Grange Hill hairstyles. It has to be said. The thing about Dudley is because you were only in 4 episodes in that first series, weren't you? In series, series 70, I can't remember. Series 16 it was, and it was already like the year group that Dudley was in was already sort of established. And I think Dudley was supposed to be already known because do you know how he's greeted when he first appears on screen?
No, I don't. I can vaguely remember what some of the first scenes were. But
yeah, Dennis says, "Oh no, look who's here!" Before Dudley's even on screen, so it's clear he was supposed to be he was supposed to be an established character in the school, and he was a bit of a comedy character. It wasn't like he wasn't well liked. Let's be honest, was he? He was very quirky, and we've mentioned the hair as well, and all that obviously added to to Dudley's character. But he was quirky as well because one of the first scenes when Mr. Robson was asking them to map the school out and divide it up in different ways, and Dudley being Dudley, do you know how he divided the school up? Can you remember?
Oh no, I remember very little. The only thing I remember from that series is Worcester sauce, but as soon as you tell me, I know I'm going to remember.
He divided it up according to smells.
Right.
Which is just typical Dudley, to be honest. He wanted the lads to take over the running of the tuck shop because he didn't think it was fair that the girls had it. So he took some of the food that the girls had, covered it all in Worcester sauce, not realizing it wasn't for the tuck shop, but it was for the party. And
the writers had a lot of fun with that character. I know they did.
I mean, I love Dudley in that first series because he wasn't like a bully or anything. He was just he was one of them kids who was really cocky and arrogant, but didn't really seem to have any reason for being like that. If you know what I mean. Putting the bird seed in Mr. Parrot's register just because his name was Parrot, and then lining his desk like it was like it was the bottom of a bird cage as well. The thing with that is that all led to sort of Lauren getting in trouble both times on that one, and Dudley wouldn't own up to it. Dudley being Dudley, obviously. But when the kids started writing a petition to get him sacked because of the way she was treating Lauren, and Lauren got nicked with that as well, Dudley took the petition and hid it in his trousers. so that if the petition didn't exist, basically Lauren couldn't get in any more trouble, and Lauren wouldn't get in trouble for it disappearing because she wasn't in the room when it disappeared. And he said, "It's the least I can do. It's my fault. She's getting in trouble anyway." And you think, all right, so he has got a bit of a nice side to him.
So that one there sort of sticks out vividly to me because that was one of the odd occasions where quite often you used to encounter fans and people sitting on a train coming through North London, and I was approached by a gang of kids that were saying to me, you better tell Mr. Parrot what happened. And actually, I had to explain to him it was like a TV show, and just said, look, just keep watching, right? Just believe me, keep watching.
I mean, that leads us on to a question I've got. So we do the guest competition, and every week I say it's a competition. It's just a way for people to try and guess who it is. But if the first person that gets it right gets to ask a question, and the question I've had by someone on Facebook, and his name's Major Lindley, and it's the second time that he's actually got it, and it just leads on nicely with what you're saying there. Did you have to wait until sort of the day of transmission to see the episodes going out, or did you ever get to watch them backstage?
No, we didn't get to watch them before. No, not at all. I mean, to be honest, I didn't really watch a lot of them. I really sort of at the time was quite uncomfortable watching myself on screen. So I know that some of the things you're going to mention and some of the things I'm going to remember, I'm not even 100% sure they made it into the program because they experimented with that character a lot, doing quirky stuff. But no, I mean, it used to come out in April, I think it was, and that's when everyone would watch it. You never got to see it beforehand. And I think they used to repeat it again in September. You'd get the repeat of the series, but they stopped that shortly before I left, I think. But
did you ever?
Nobody gets a preview.
But did you ever sort of did you critique yourself watching it?
Not really. No, I just wouldn't watch it. I just wouldn't watch it. I mean, you would sort of. It was a natural thing that whenever you shot a scene, everyone would rush and look at the screen to see how it was recorded, so you get to see your scene as it was shot. But actually seeing it all stitched together, no, I don't. I think at the time I would have cringed so hard I probably wouldn't have gone back to doing it.
And had you been a fan of Grange Hill beforehand?
It was. I mean, it's an iconic show, right? I think you're always aware that it's on.
Yeah.
I think, you had that kind of window of between 3 and 5 o'clock on a weekday, which was the only time kids programs came on. And it was on. It was one of those things. I'm not. I don't watch a lot of TV programs now. I never really have. But it was a thing that it was always aware was on, and you kind of knew the characters and the big storylines and things. And I suppose as a child actor, that's kind of the zenith, right? You're thinking if I'm going to do something, it's got to be Grange Hill. Like, that's either that or Biker Grove was a bit too far for me. But,
would have been quite a commute, I imagine, to get to that one. Like, so you said there was only 4 episodes, and you weren't really expecting to be in the next series then. After that series?
No, I think they'd said that it was only going to be temporary, but you always had this sort of ceremony thing towards the end, where they would kind of sit down and tell you whether your character was coming back next year, and I was kind of half expecting not to. In fact, I kind of gave them the ump because the day of the last shoot, where they had the end of year party, first thing I did was ran to the barbers around the corner and got that mullet chopped off. And they went quite mad because they kind of want, just in case they've got to reshoot scenes and things like that. But I thought, you said I weren't coming back, so I weren't going to keep any longer than I had to. But no, they said Albert Barber really likes the character. They said we're thinking of, like, we could bring you back next year. It will be a sort of smaller part, but he likes the character. So they said just stay available. I think at the time you're still sort of working within those 40 odd days a year or whatever you could do when you were a child. So and I think shortly after that, I think we started filming and rehearsing about April. But it was early in the year. They said they wanted to come back for the first block, which was they used to sort of shoot, rehearse for and film for. That's how they used to sort of structure the year. So they sent me a few scripts, and I think I had a couple of lines. I think may have been in the first 4. But I think it was when Stephen Andrew came along, who was, I think he became the producer, but at the time he was the director and probably the favourites of most of the cast. And he absolutely loved the character. He was a real fan of comedy, and he was one that sort of really encouraged me not to be self-conscious and just lean into it. Just find like those sort of characters like Trigger and Rodney and Screech from Saved by the Bell and those kind. They said just lean right into it, And he was always a huge advocate for the character.
Brilliant. And that must be something when you've got that backing behind you, like that must be great.
That said, though, I think the second year was the first year that they said yes, you're definitely coming back next year. The year after that, they said they wasn't sure, and then they changed their mind. The year after that, they said they didn't want it, and then they changed their mind. And I think the last year I said I wasn't coming back, and then they convinced me to come back. So it was never certain.
Yeah. All right. So then you did move on. You did come back for year 9, series 17, and there was all that thing with, like, the drama group was there, and they were doing Romeo and Juliet, and all the lads being very sort of laddish, weren't they? But then all the lads left because of after the improvisation scene went wrong, which then all led to, the Jessica assault and things. And am I right in thinking that when that was filmed, the lads didn't actually know who was going to be named as the one that had done the groping? Is that right?
Yeah, I think nobody knew.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, I say that. Like I say, we used to get the scripts for 4 episodes at a time. So we'd rehearse those and film those. Some of them were incredibly disciplined and read the whole scripts. A lot of others, like us, just flicked through and found your name and highlighted them and stuff. So I think those that actually read the scripts, depending on what blocks they spanned over, probably did know if you'd read them all. But I, like a lot of others, just read our own parts.
Okay. And there's a scene in that series where you get, the comedy side, the quirky side of Dudley comes out, where Dudley's looking in a bin, and the girls, Rachel asks him what he's doing, and he just says, "I'm recycling." When he pulls out a chocolate bar and eats it. Now, Dudley's known for that. Dudley's like, sort of, when people talk about Dudley, the people say, like, well, he was the one who was always looking in the bins, but he wasn't really. I think it happened a few times, but it wasn't like it was like a constant thing where he was always doing it. Like,
yeah, I think, as I say, there were some that we shot that didn't always make it in, and I seem to remember quite a few. That one there was particularly well known. That's one everyone always commented on. I actually asked them to stop making me eat bins, and they kindly agreed.
But one of the girls says, "You're gross, Dudley," and he just says, "I know," and walks off. And I love all that. Like, but he was going back to that thing of the thing with Jessica as well. Dudley was convinced that she was lying. You'd hear him say that to the lads. She's lying about what's happened, and and all that. And I suppose it's one of them things that Grange Hill did really well. It covered like a sensitive topic like that, but it also showed sort of like the attitudes of people as well. And when Amy Phillips was on, who played Jessica, she said, it showed that so many girls don't want to report abuse and don't want to take abuse further because they're scared of the fact that they're not going to be believed. And it was one of those things that was done really well.
They do, in particular, they could get away with things like with Dudley, because I remember some other lines as well where he'd said things that were, quite insensitive. But I think he had that sort of level of quirkiness about him that I just don't think he was self-aware or aware of others. So you could sort of get away with saying some things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting if they were to have that character now, they would probably have a bit more of a sort of focus on maybe the underlying issues of Dudley, like some of the sort of potential neurodivergence.
Yeah.
I think he clearly was, not like the others, but
yeah,
he certainly had this sort of insensitive way of just saying stuff.
Yeah, he had sort of like no filter, really, did he? Do you know what I mean? And like when Mrs. Keel collapsed in the class, and Dudley told everyone that Anna Wright was to blame and started chanting "head killer" in the middle of the playground, which it was Anna Wright. Do you know what I mean? And like, although she was younger than Dudley, she could handle herself, as Dudley found out.
I do remember that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing Jenny Long, who played Anna, I'm guessing she didn't actually make proper contact with him when she did it, like, because she knees him.
I remember that.
But yeah, I just remember, when you watch that and you're just thinking, yeah, mate, you're a lot bigger than her, but let's be honest, it's Anna Wright, and she's probably going to let you know what she thinks of you in a minute. Like, and then there was all that thing with the play. Dudley and Dennis sneaked into the hall to watch the girls do the play. They hid under the stage blocks, and I love that because it carries on over 2 episodes as well. It was sort of like left on like a cliffhanger of what they were going to do to get out. Dennis took more of the rap than Dudley did for that one in the end. It was one of the few times I think where Dudley sort of got away with things a little bit. Dudley never seemed bothered by the fact that they were going to ever get caught, but the girls did find out that it was Dennis. But the girls still put their play on. They couldn't put it on in the school, but they went to the park to do it.
Remember that? Yeah, when we shot that scene, so because I remember us being under the boxes. And it was right before lunch when they first shot it. Right. And I remember there was some bits where Dennis and I are both speaking to each other through the holes in the boxes. And they put us underneath and put all the stuff on top and then just called lunch and went out and left us. Right, obviously as like a prank. And when they come back and took all the stuff off and just said, no, look, seriously, we've got one take with this. Like, so, once you stand up and it all smashes. So when we actually shot it, the moment I stood up, because I'd been underneath there waiting so long, I got lightheaded and nearly fainted. Right. So where I had the light, I just and I had to stop, and it took ages to recalibrate it and go to the shop and buy a load more stuff to put on there. But yeah, it was, I remember that one vividly for obvious reasons.
Yeah. So then the girls end up in the park, and they did their play, and it was about sexism and how they thought the lads' attitudes to girls were, and Dudley sort of justified them doing the play because as they start off, Dudley was watching and shouts, "Get him off!" in the play, and then starts chanting "off, off." So he gets grabbed up by Julie Corrigan, and they say to him, "Well, we'll take our clothes off if you take your clothes off." And Dudley sort of goes with his tail between his legs, so to speak, and goes and sits back down, which again just sort of showed the fact that he was all front, wasn't he? He had that sort of thing where, as I say, he was quite arrogant and smug, but without any sort of real reason to be like that.
Yeah, and probably had some sort of quite ignorant misogynist type ideals that you might have had at those ages.
But, yeah, definitely. And now, also in that series, and this was the main thing that I remember Dudley for, and when you think of all the things of Dudley, whether it's the ones to remember him for, I don't know, but it's when he joins the choir and he tells Mr. Manyeki, the choir master, that he didn't sing like anyone else, which was really, really true. Because when he sang, he was really flat, he was really out of tune, and he described himself as vocally challenged. Now, don't take this the wrong way, but was that your actual singing voice?
No, actually, I mean, one of the things I could do when I was younger was carry a tune, actually. I think that's probably when early on people, particularly my mum, had thought I'd had a flair for that sort of thing. So I actually find it quite difficult to think when I did it first of all, I remember it was so over the top that it just seemed like it was stupid, and I actually had to have someone say, you have to kind of be flat and just sing off key. But no, I like to think I can sing at least 50% of the notes. Right, I think nowadays, but
because it's weird, because I for years had in my head the line, "Will you buy any milk today, mistress?" but not sung in there, and I couldn't remember. Genuinely, I couldn't remember where it had got it from until one day I just happened to revisit that episode, and I was like, "That's where it's from. That's where it's from." We also see signs of Dudley's sort of, the fact that he didn't always think about what he was saying and stuff when he was paired with Rachel in a tennis lesson. Now, Rachel, as we know, was played by Francesca Martinez, and obviously, and Dudley says, "Why have I got to play with her? She can't even hit the ball back to me." And and you just think that's shocking for someone to be saying. But again, it was the type of thing Dudley would say, and it was the type of thing that Grange Hill did, showing the fact that it wasn't that, because with Dudley, I don't think it was a prejudice. He was just sort of speaking his mind. But there were these prejudices, and there still are these prejudices around.
There are, and I think, in the field that I work in, I work with some of the most talented people are on the sort of autistic spectrum disorder. And I think you sort of said that thing there about quality filter, but sometimes it is just, you think it, you say it.
Yeah,
And there's no sort of empathy, or these are things that kind of have to be trained in. But that's why I said I think nowadays if they looked at him, they would probably put a bit more focus on that element of him, I think.
But then Dudley was then put in his place again by Rachel when they had that computer tennis tournament.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which
was great.
I said this to Kevin Bishop when he was on. It just seemed like a bizarre thing to do anyway, because they were always looking for somewhere to do it. But then obviously Rachel beat Dudley in that, and like as I say, properly put him in his place on that one. Yeah. So then
I have to say that Francesca and I and Natalie, rest in peace, we were a deadly combination on set for Corpse.
Yeah.
Because I think Francesca would start me off, or I'd start her off, and then once we started laughing, that was it. We used to get in so much trouble. It's one of those things you genuinely can't help, right?
Yeah.
Once you start, but I think there's barely a scene that Francesca and I were in together that didn't happen.
Right. So, who would you say were sort of your best friends then on the program?
I genuinely think we all got along. It was a little bit similar to how it would be at school, where the children were playing sort of people roughly their same age, so you kind of had your older group, like your sort of Rachel Roberts and Kelly George and those sort of people that are always friendly and welcoming. But I think the cast that were the year that you were in, we spent so much time together. I think a lot of us travelled in on coaches together. I generally don't think there was any animosity between any people there at all. There'd be a bit of bickering, but no, I think we were all good friends. Really, I think I don't know that anyone stands out. I think even quite a few of them we'd meet up and do stuff outside of filming, but we were quite sort of geographically dispersed.
Right.
I think particularly when I started doing Grange Hill, I was in London, but then I moved out to Essex, so we were all quite far away. But no, I don't. I'm remiss now. I don't think I stay in touch with many people from Grange Hill. I think in the days of Facebook, I was friends with nearly all of them, but I'm not on there anymore. No, I think we all just got on well. Naturally, sort of Jamie and Alan and I were always in the bulk of scenes together, and we generally had to share a dressing room. So I'd say out of any of them, it was probably those two guys, because we just spent so much time together. But no, I think we all got along.
Cool. Okay, so if we move on then to Series 18, which went out in 1995. And the one big thing about this series, now it doesn't really affect Dudley's character, but an actress had started in year 7 called Laura Hammett.
Oh, yeah.
So, for people that don't know, obviously your younger sister, what was it like having her on the set all of a sudden?
We were rarely in any scenes together. I think I can think of one or two. And I think by the time that she had joined, when you kind of hit that age 16 mark, you then start to get your own dressing room. Right. Whereas the kids more sort of. So I think she was starting at the time that I was moving into getting the own dressing room and stuff. So we'd see her in rehearsals and things like that. But it was great for me, because I think the other thing, when you get to 16, you've got to fund your own way to get into work. But Laura used to get sent the cab, so any days we were there together, I could jump in the cab with her. And actually, fortunately, just around the corner from us where we moved was the other brother and sister, or another brother and sister, parent from Grange, which was Belinda and Dave Crane. So they both lived about 5 minutes around the corner. So Laura joining in was actually quite handy, yeah, because we'd all jump in her cab. But...
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, you were in year 10 by this point, and in the first scene, Julie Corrigan is camping. The first scene Dudley's in, Julie Corrigan's camping on the school field to protest a road was going to be getting built through. And again, Dudley, this is one scene where we do see Dudley back in the bins, finding a prawn sandwich. And Julie's like, don't be eating that, don't be eating that. And he eats it anyway because he's Dudley. And that's what he does. Now, there was also the girls had a rugby match in that episode, and some of the lads dressed as cheerleaders, and I believe you were one of them.
No, that one's not ringing a bell, but
you may well have blanked that one out.
That one deep down.
I was watching it the other day. I'm sure he must be in that, because it seemed to be all the lads were all from different years, and it seemed to be all sorts of like your main players who were dressed in it, dressed up. But I couldn't see Dudley. But it was in another episode later on. They went, "Oh, there's that picture. Remember that when you dressed up as a cheerleader last year?" And there was a photograph. So obviously you were there as that one. And in that series, Lucy had decided to produce a fact sheet for teenagers in the local area, just with different things that he wants to do. And Dudley decided it should have a Lonely Hearts section in, because Dudley had become infatuated with a girl called Dawn.
I remember this one, yeah.
And he was a little bit unlucky in love, Dudley, throughout the years, wasn't he? And what I love about that, he gives his advert to Dennis, because Dennis and Josh are going to help out Lucy with producing the fact sheet. And he gives his advert to Dennis, and Dennis said, "What's this?" He says, "You want to meet a ravishing girl?" I just think that's good. A ravishing girl, like. But again, typical Dudley. Dennis and Josh put the entry in. Dennis gives this fact sheet to Dawn, and you see Dudley crossing his fingers, but also crossing his legs in the hope that it'll get there.
And I specifically remember those were the ones that were directed by Stephen Andrew, and we had so much fun doing that. Yeah. He just so much tried to bring the comedy out of every moment with Dudley, which he was great.
On the advert, it said about replying to box 21. So the girl Dawn goes to the toilet, so Dudley follows her and puts this like a shoebox with 21 and just leaves it outside. And at the end of the day, the box is gone, and Dudley sees Dawn talking to a lad who she assumes is the one that's put the advert in. And the lad doesn't deny it and walks off with Dawn. Like, because Dawn was a bit of a environmentalist, Dudley wants to know more about this, more about it. And Julie Corrigan at this point was living in a squat with a lot of other environmentalists. They were protesting against a road widening scheme. So Dudley decides he wants to find out more about that, so he'll have something in common with Dawn to talk about. And he goes to the squat, and the protesters are staying in the squat. But as Dudley's there, it's when all like the JCBs and the diggers and everything arrive, and it just seems chaos. That scene, was it chaos?
Was that the one where I rescued the cat?
Rescued the cat, yeah.
God. So yeah, I mean, so we did some of the filming was done in a kind of derelict building that was, I think, somewhere like North Acton or something like that. It was sort of in north west of London, and it was a sort of derelict. That's where they did a lot of the inside filming, but the outside bit was all done on the Elstree film lot. And I remember doing that, and I remember actually bringing one of my friends was there that day to watch the filming of it. And it was really good, apart from that cat was just not compliant at all, to the point that I had to put fishing wire around its collar and around me. And this thing was just, the scratches afterwards was unbelievable. The thing clawed the hell out of me. But I remember that one.
Wow. Yeah, because Dudley's running off as the JCBs arrive, but then he remembers the cat, so he runs back to get it. And then the next day, he was sort of acting all injured, and that Dawn was there, and obviously he's milking a story about how he got injured saving the cat. And Dawn seems really impressed with Dudley, and you think he's getting somewhere. And then all of a sudden, this older lad turns up with his arm around Dawn and does that classic thing of calling Dudley by the wrong name. and calling him Dougie, just that little bit of undermining, just to push it that little bit further. They walk off then, and the girls are talking about the lad that Dawn's with, the fact that he's older and he's handsome and all that. But Dudley couldn't understand why she fancied that lad and didn't fancy Dudley. He couldn't get his head around it at all. But then that Lonely Hearts column sort of took off a little bit there, and he was involved with Dennis and Josh doing the Lonely Hearts column. But it was weird because, like, nowadays, if it was to happen, everyone would have sort of their own username on it. But on that one, they made the names up, and Dudley accidentally gives two people the same name of Sexy Sadie, and it all gets a bit classic Grange Hill comedy where people are getting matched with the wrong people, and Robin was matched up with James Arnold, and there was a lad in the year 12 who probably should have been matched with Robin, was matched with a much younger girl, and there was all sorts of things happened from that because the girl's mum rang the school, told the school, and the lad who was in year 12 stopped Dudley and nicked his shirt, took his shirt off him, basically, and Dudley's walking around and stayed the rest of the episode in just a blazer and tie.
So on that, they actually wanted to take the whole lot. They wanted to just leave me with nothing on top, and I refused to do it. So we compromised on just the shirt. Physics of that is just unusual, right? How do you rip someone's shirt and leave on the tie and blazer?
The tie's still fastened. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the fact that happened to Dudley, I felt like that was quite unfair on Dudley because he wasn't really. It was the other two who were more sort of involved than Dudley was. I think he was just a victim of circumstance there. He just happened to be there at the time. Yeah. It was surely more to do with Dennis and Josh than Dudley. But another thing that happened coming from all that was when Dudley had been to the squat, there was photographs taken of Dudley entering the squat. But the truant officer wanted something done about it because the photos were sent to the school. But that never really seemed to go anywhere, that storyline. It was like, we need to do something about this. But then it just didn't seem to happen. Nothing really happened to Dudley over that. But the big thing, I think, the biggest thing that happened in that series was obviously the HIV storyline. And Lucy's mum had died from HIV. And before that, there'd been a bit of a HIV awareness workshop, which it started off quite like everyone seemed to be taking it quite seriously, but then Dudley and his mates just started messing about. But it was quite graphic, that episode, I thought, because they were showing things like putting condoms on cucumbers and stuff like that. And again, we always say the fact that Grange Hill dared to do that sort of stuff on a kids' TV program was brilliant.
Yeah, I think they were always pushing the boundaries. I remember that one in particular. They did actually bring experts in and do these workshops with the whole cast in preparation for this. So we actually went through all that stuff beforehand. I think also to, I suppose, try and help to add to the emotion of what people deal with that go through that stuff. So it was, I mean, they'd prepared all that quite well. But yeah, I mean, I think Grange Hill did try and push the boundaries. I think a lot of stuff probably did end up on the editing room floor, to be honest, because they sometimes might have gone a bit too far. It kind of always was reaching that point. I found that to try and get to where they wanted to be, or kind of compete with the type of format of show they were going for, or even to stick with the same fans that had followed it for years, it was going to have to become one of those late night shows. And I think then something like Waterloo Road came along, and I thought, you know what, that's what Grange Hill could have become.
But so as we said there, Lucy's mum died, and that though the subsequent episodes there showed sort of the ignorance around HIV. Certainly at the time, there was a lot more because it wasn't as well known, and there was a lot more ignorance around. And there was things which I never quite understood this. They did a follow-up lesson to the HIV awareness workshop, knowing Lucy was in there and knowing that her mum had died from HIV, and it just seemed like a daft thing anyway to do.
Yeah.
Because in the middle of it, Lucy walks out, and it was when that lad Dean sort of realizes that Lucy's mum must have had something to do with her death, must have had something to do with HIV. And Dean told people that Lucy's mum had died of AIDS, and then Dudley then told Dennis, and Dennis went for him.
I remember that one.
And there was he attacked him. Was there much choreography involved in that fight scene?
We rehearsed it a couple of times. I remember Nigel, who was a director at the time, was sort of laughing at how much fun we were having with it because we were,
right.
Dennis, I think Alan and I were trying to sort of plan it as if it was going to be some Hollywood staged kind of choreographed fight. I think what we agreed is that we just have a bunch of boxes on the floor. We just grab each other and just go for it. And I think that was it really. One take, threw us over the table with a bunch of empty boxes on the other side. But I think we had delusions of doing something a bit more choreographed at the time. But no, that was it.
Like Stallone or something like that. Like
something there.
But it was really good though, those episodes, because it did highlight the ignorance in people's attitudes towards it. Even though Lucy's mum had contracted HIV through a blood transfusion that she'd had years before, but it still sort of showed the fact that people were ignorant and didn't really know how to handle the situation, and people wouldn't like get in the swimming pool with her and stuff. And again, it was just one of those things that Grange Hill did really well, I thought.
I think so, yeah. I mean, that did seem to be the general attitude at the time. I mean, I remember some of the sports teams that I followed when it was uncovered that certain players had HIV, their team refused to play with them, around the locker room and those sorts of things. So I think there was a lot of uncertainty as well, the sort of difference between HIV and AIDS.
Yeah.
As Granger always did, I think they tackled it in a really helpful way.
Mm-hmm. Now, in that series, you were only in 7 episodes in that one. Is there any reason for that one?
No, I think the character always was a sort of, I suppose, like a supporting role. So, right. I mean, there were sometimes they'd give Dudley a big part, but I think a lot of the time I found myself going into film just to be in the background.
Right.
Okay. I know the ones that I don't remember. I think I got quite nostalgic listening to some of the early episodes of this and sort of decided to go and look through some of the old ones on Grange Hill and on YouTube. And I was looking for thinking, I don't remember filming this. I just don't remember doing it.
Yeah.
But also, some of them I would go in some blocks where I would be there, but only as a background character. Right. So I'm not sure if you get a credit in the episode if you if you don't speak.
Right.
But there were probably a lot that I was in that just didn't talk.
Right. Okay. All right. So then, if we move on then to series 19, and Dudley was in year 11 at this point, and there's a bit where there's a lad who's got this big flash jacket on. He's been on an exchange to the USA, which I thought was an incredible story anyway. And Dudley asks him if he'd been to Chicago or New York, because they were the only 2 places that he knew of in America, apart from Baywatch. And then that all a really ridiculous scheme happened then, where I mentioned this to when Alan Cave was on. The fact that this is when Jessica was suffering with ME and was going to be staying with her aunt in California. So Dennis decides, well, we can get Jessica to send us clothing from America and we can sell it. And you just think, lad, shut up. I mean, you just think, but it's a typical Grange Hill sort of money-making thing. But so Dudley, Dennis and Josh go to see Jessica. And even knowing how ill she is, they still put this ridiculous scheme forward to her. And it's only when Arnie comes in and says, look, what are you doing? You shouldn't be doing this. She's clearly not well, that they decide to leave. And it's a really nice scene. And it's obviously the scene was made for Arnie to show the fact that he started believing that Jessica was really ill, because he'd been calling her on faking the whole time. But when you just watch it and you just think, oh my God, what are these idiots up to here? Like, so then Dennis decides, well, what we can do is we can get stuff from the market, so we put transfers on it and no one will ever know the difference. So they do that. But this time it was Dudley who had the crisis of conscience, saying, this is immoral, we can't be telling people it's all coming from America when we've been making it ourselves. And he also said something's going to go wrong, just as Dennis patted Josh on the back and all the letters that they'd stuck on the jacket all fell off, which again, typical Grange Hill. Now, do you remember what Dudley wanted to be when he left school?
I think I do.
Go on.
Did he say? Did he say he wanted to be a
He
dentist?
did say he wants to be a dentist.
He
Yeah.
did.
He started telling everyone he wants to be a dentist, and he was saying, "Look, I've got 12 fillings," and started showing his fillings to everyone. And
Yeah.
in that series, there was a thing because uh, Fiona Wade was in a joint now who played Joanna Day, and someone had been taking pictures of Joanna. Dudley told Josh that he fancied Joanna, and it just seemed too obvious for it to be Dudley who'd be the one that was stolen. It was like this big mystery, and because Joanna thought it was one of the workmen who'd been working in the school, but then she saw some photographs on a notice board, and it said photographs by Dudley, and she realised they were the same type of photographs that had been left of her, and then she ran after she found Dudley and told him that he was the biggest creep that she'd ever met, which I think was a bit harsh because it was Dudley trying to be romantic, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was hopeless romantic. Yeah.
He really was, and he then decides to leave her alone, leave girls alone, and he decided he'd go to chess club instead. Now, could you play chess? Did you play chess at the time? Like,
I, I could actually, yeah, I did. I wasn't very good. I did. I think even at one point I did go to chess club at my school.
right?
But yeah, I
But
could play. I learned to play
do
from
you
a young
remember what
age.
happened with the chess club storyline in Grange Hill?
I don't know. This one's even that whole photographs thing is just very vague.
So the chess club, it starts off and it's really well attended. Like there's loads of people there. But Dudley's playing this young girl and she's taking ages, or he's saying she's taking too long over a move. And then he says that girls shouldn't be allowed to play chess, and it should be men only, not boys only. It should be men only. And the next time we see the chess club, Dudley's the only one there. And Laurie comes in and she says to him, "I'll play it." He went, "No, you won't. No girls allowed." And and you just think, you're there, you want to play chess, someone's coming off at you. But because she's a girl, you don't want to know. And then we move on from that. And there's a bit, because there was a storyline of bullying amongst the younger kids going on at the time. So Dudley and Josh go to the sessions to learn to become like sort of confront the bully counselors. And do you remember what happens in this one? So if I give you a little bit at the start, Dudley and Josh ask Miss Carver to sit on a chair and pretend that she's the bully and they're going to be the counselors.
Right, no, this one's really not ringing
So
any bells. Sorry.
it's what they do is they say, "We're going to do a role play." And
Right.
Dudley's got a torch and he basically shines it in Miss Carver's eyes as she's the bully. They're the counselors, but they're basically being good cop and bad cop because he said
Oh, I do remember that. Yeah.
because they think it'll make it easier for the bully to crack, and it's like that. You've really got the wrong end of the stick of what you're meant to be doing here, lads. Um, Surprisingly, Dudley doesn't get to become a counsellor in this one, but Josh does, and there was a musical going on. The musical of Grease was going on at the
On that one.
time,
Yeah.
and Dudley wasn't in the musical, surprisingly, because obviously, as we'd learned a couple of years earlier, he was vocally challenged. But he wanted to be involved with the scenery and the artwork because at the time there was a graffiti artist that'd been tagging the school, and Dudley seemed to really like that. He said that basically, if this graffiti artist went commercial, he could probably make a bit of a fortune. And no one really took him seriously when he wanted to help paint the scenery, and he just had them sort of shifting stuff around. I think in a way for people to sort of try and take his art seriously, Dudley broke into the school or the school grounds overnight and got on the lift outside the building,
Vaguely, I remember this one.
and then he started tagging at the building, but then the lift broke and he was basically stuck there overnight. and it basically everyone just assumed he was that graffiti artist, Shine. I think the graffiti artist was called. But Dudley is adamant that he's not Shine, he's not the graffiti artist, and he wanted to tag it but couldn't. But do you remember what happened from there?
I mean, this was the one where I think didn't he get stuck in the cradle overnight or something like that?
He got stuck in the lift. Then when Mr. Robson spoke to him, he was then expelled from the school, basically.
Oh, right, yeah.
Mr. Robson said and the evidence did point to Dudley. Now, filming that scene, I'm guessing you weren't left out overnight. They didn't do a prank on you like they did with the stage blocks on this one. Like,
no, we had like a little harness thing attached to it, but yeah, we just shot that one in one go, I think.
Cool. Okay. So then Dudley was expelled. Mr. Robson said he didn't know what he'd be able to do about the sixth form. And Dudley maintained even to his mates that he wasn't the graffiti artist. He'd wanted to do something, but he hadn't got round to doing it because the way the lift had broken. And so all his mates are there in the park with him. And he says to them, he says, "You've done nothing but take the mick out of me during my time here," which is probably justified, to be honest. But they'd probably be glad to see the back of him. But then they presented him with his own sort of personalised yearbook. Now, you've mentioned this earlier on. Were you supposed to leave then?
I think at that point, I think that was that the series before the last one, was it?
So you had 2 in sixth form. This is the one before you joined the sixth form.
Yeah, so that's where I think I'd had enough of doing the role. I wasn't planning on coming back the next year. And I think they decided that they would write the character out.
Okay, but then when the next series came around, they were in sixth form, and Dudley was there. So obviously, something had changed somewhere because you were back in there.
Yeah, they'd called me and asked. Yeah, they called me and asked to come back, and I think at the time I was around about 18 or 19, so I sort of began to think that the quirkiness of the character was almost. I wasn't having a good time outside of filming. A lot of the approaching that you get from fans wasn't pleasant, and I just felt it wasn't really worth it. And I was quite getting into DJing at the time as well. Then, I just said, let's just sort of part ways. And then they'd contacted me in between, I think it ending and it starting to say, would I reconsider?
Right.
And I just said to him, look, I don't mind as long as we can sort of drop out the really stupid stuff like eating from bins and these kind of things. And I think they said they'd had a plan with, which you'll probably come on to with it, where it was going to be a bit more around his sort of relationship and showing empathy from sort of Dennis, and it was going to be a lot more, a bit less Dudley, although there'd be the sort of quirky purple crushed velvet suits and whatnot at the parties. But they were going to do a bit less of the and wanted to make it just a little bit mature a bit in that series. So and they said it wouldn't be one that you was going to be sort of heavily needed, but we would like to finish the story off. So I just said, no problem. We agreed to come back.
You were part of Dennis, Josh, and Dudley all had motorbikes. Could you already ride the motorbike?
No, Grange Hill actually. So Alan did. Alan used to come in from work on his come in to work on his bike, which I think is probably what kicked that storyline off.
Right. Okay.
But both Jamie and I got sent to do our compulsory basic training, so we both got our sort of basic moped licenses. Grange Hill paid for it. We both got on the same day, so yeah. But it was useful because I rode a moped for a couple of years after that.
Yeah. And the other thing that was really noticeable in that series was another new hairstyle, the bleach blonde, the Robbie Fowler, if we can call it that, the bleach blonde hair. Your idea, I'm guessing again.
No, so we had another one we compromised on. So they wanted to. I think I always had a bit of a weird hairstyle, didn't I? I had the mullet in the first series and that kind of bold step.
And the 90s curtains.
That's it, the 90s curtains, yeah. But they wanted, their idea was to have it so that it was bleach blonde, but, completely shocking and spiky and all over the place. So I agreed to go and have the hair bleach, which they paid for. And when they started experimenting with different styles, and I just said that it's not into that. So I said, can we just have the bleached hair be a step far enough? Yeah. I think we all agreed that was the easiest way. But and actually, there used to become a tradition after that for a couple of years that I'd bleach my hair in the summer.
Brilliant. Okay. And you mentioned there about the going to the party with the suit on and all that.
Yeah.
But he wasn't allowed in, even though he brought a bottle, and it was a vodka bottle, but it had water in it. And that's possibly possibly the last time we saw any sort of real quirkiness, I think, from Dudley there.
I actually did watch that one the other day, and again, it sort of pushed me on the floor and pouring the water all over me, and I was just, I don't remember filming that,
right.
But it's starting to ring a bell now. But yeah,
right.
But yeah, I think that was after that. I think it was a lot of the storyline around Dennis and the bike stuff.
And it did sort of that. It was sort of, Dennis had the accident. It was sort of everyone's attitudes towards it, and everyone, not just Dennis, learning to deal with it and live with it, because Dudley realised that Dennis he needed to speak to Lucy about it all, because obviously Dennis was quite bitter about things, and that's when we see that like quite sensitive side from Dudley, saying, you've got to talk to her about what's going on. And when Dudley and Dennis went for a walk, when I think Dennis had fallen down the stairs on his crutches at this point, so he was back in the wheelchair and feeling even more sort of sorry for himself. And Dudley was just talking to Dennis, and Dennis told him to shut up, but like quite angrily, not like in a jokey way. So Dudley basically says to Dennis, "Look, you need to sort yourself out." And Claire had asked Dennis, to do an interview for the school magazine. And again, it was Dudley was like saying, this isn't a good idea. Dennis shouldn't be doing this. And it was just showing that he did have Dennis' sort of best interests at heart, which, like you said, we hadn't seen before. The quirkiness had sort of gone from his character, and he was showing that, he was a mate and he wanted to look out for Dennis.
Yeah, and as I say, I think it was good the character went in that direction, but I think part of it was the agreement, or whether they'd foreplanned that and just sort of, or whether it's something we agreed I had any sort of influence over, I don't know. But yeah, it was agreed they wanted to have him sort of mature a bit and show a bit more of the caring side of Dudley.
Yeah. And another thing that happened in this series was when there was talk of Lauren going to Barbados, I think it was, and her grandmother came to the school, and she's walking around, she gets to meet everyone, but then she sees Mr. Brisley, and she says, "Is this Dudley?" And Mr. Brisley asks the class, "Do I look like Dudley?" And Dudley's line is, "You wish." Dudley's arrogance coming back in again there, like. And then we move on then to your last series, which was series 21. And it starts off with a caveman day for year 7s, but Dudley and Claire have gone to help out on that. Do you remember this one at all? It was filmed in a park or some woods.
Filmed in a forest. I do remember that one. Yeah, it was filmed in a forest. Yeah. I do remember that was there's a bit where we're sitting on the log together.
So that's always good. Again, Dudley, the hopeless romantic. He was trying to make something happen, wasn't he, with Claire, basically. Trying to put his arm around there and all, but she was completely oblivious to it all. And there's a bit where he actually says something like, about being a bit more romantic, but she stands up, not realizing. And again, Dudley falls over again. It was his little quirky moments. But one of the kids, Adam, had gone missing, and Dudley became involved in the search for that one. Can you remember where it was filmed?
I don't. I mean, sometimes you just be popped on a coach and end up in the middle of a field somewhere, unless you kind of knew where you were going or were paying attention. Then no. I do remember that one was. Yeah, we were all taken there, and it had your kind of typical, dressing rooms and outside catering and stuff like that. So I can't. I've no idea where that was.
Brilliant.
Probably about an hour. I remember they're normally sort of about an hour away from Elstree Studios.
Right. And they thought that there was a wolf on the loose in the premises, but it just turned out to be like a really old sort of mangy dog. And they found the kid, and obviously it was all sorted. Now, you mentioned earlier there was days when you just went in filming and you might have been in the background, and that seemed to happen quite a bit in the sixth form series.
Yeah.
There wasn't really sort of any major storylines you were involved in, obviously, other than dealing with Dennis. Because there was things like where the sixth form common room was going to get turned into a study area for GCSE and A-level students, so there was a little bit of a protest, but again, that sort of got quashed, but then the big thing again was still the Dennis storyline, and Dennis had his court date to go for his compensation claim, And Dudley wants to go with Dennis because he wants to show him that he was a mate. He wants to show him that he would be there for him. But Dennis didn't really want him to go. And so he gave, this shows you of the time. He gave Dennis a mobile phone, which was his dad's mobile phone, because not everyone had mobile phones in the late 90s. And he said it was just so he could contact them from the court, to let him know anything happens. He said, I know you don't want me there, but I want you to know that basically I want you to know that I'm thinking of you. And then Dudley finds out that because Lucy had to go as a witness anyway, but he also found out that Claire was going to court. Dennis said Claire could go because Dennis was like, well, she asked and she wants to study law. And Dudley says, this is like a party, isn't it? And he just didn't think, and it wasn't fair, to be honest. I don't think it was fair that Dudley just wants to look out for him. He had no ulterior motive to go. He just wants Dennis to know that he'd be there for him. And even like the next morning, the morning of the court case, Dudley rang him on the mobile phone. And when Dennis found out it was Dudley, he just hung up on him. And you just think, you know what? He's your mate. He's just trying to do right by you, basically. Maybe it was because he had been a bit quirky and a bit stupid in the past, and Dennis thought he wasn't going to take things seriously. I don't know, but
maybe, yeah. That's what I was going to ask. I don't know if there was an event. I think it was just one of those things that just deteriorated gradually. I think, wasn't it?
And then Dennis got us out of court settlements for $500,000, where they were all talking about what he should do with his money, and Dudley suggested. No, this is Dennis that he's talking to. Dennis should buy a sports car. Which again, very, very, very Dudley, because, not thinking, realising the fact that Dennis probably wouldn't be able to drive. And Dennis decides he's going to go on a trip across Australia. So they have a surprise party, which Dudley takes him to, the surprise leaving party that they have for him. And then that was the last time we saw Dudley in Grange Hill. And obviously, you did mention that there was a couple of times when you were going to leave anyway, but obviously it was the right time for leaving because you'd done the 2 years in sixth form. How did you feel about it at that point?
Okay, so I think there was a period, maybe not the last season, the season before, because I think for most of us, Grange Hill wasn't an incredibly well paid. I mean, most things on the BBC aren't, unless you're one of the big names. It's more done for sort of prestige and exposure, and everyone that does Grange Hill, a lot of them going to do other stuff, and being iconic and those sorts of things. But the thing that did sell it to you was because they used to, so they'd pay you. The contracts were negotiated based on the blocks. Right. So the 6 weeks of 4 episodes and recorded, rehearsed and then recorded. But what we all relied on was, because also Grange will stop filming in October. Right. So between October and April, you either went and got a normal job, or well, if you're lucky, you might have done some panto. Anisha didn't like doing panto, so we didn't do that. A lot of Grange Hill folks did. Others might go and appear in other things, but when they used to repeat them in September, you would get 80% of your original contract. So that's kind of what made it worthwhile.
Yeah.
I think they announced last minute, right towards the end of filming, that they had lost, that they weren't going to be doing the repeats in September anymore.
Right. Okay.
Right. So instantly, everyone had lost a great financial incentive that was working on it, right? Because you just weren't getting the residuals anymore. I think also what would happen is they would negotiate on the block, and it didn't always matter how much you were doing. So in some cases, if I was in a block only recording, bit parts, background characters, only there for 2 days, not even rehearsals because I haven't got a line, I would still get the same money.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that, they had quite a bit of tough negotiation in Grange Hill offices when that came through for people wanting to renew. I think a lot of people, either didn't want to come back or were asking for a lot higher fees and things like that. And my character being a sort of, supporting character, I didn't really have much negotiating power. But I think we'd kind of agreed at the end of it that, look, we'll just not use you as much, because I was asking for more money. So they were like, look, we'll just write your character out and we'll have them in less, so you've got to come in less, but we'd like you to sort of stay around until the end. And I think towards the end, it just became it was all over that. I sort of left my agent over it. Clearly wasn't interested in doing acting anymore. Right. And, I think we just sort of agreed just to wind the character back. But I wouldn't have done anything unprofessional if they asked me to come in and do it. But I think it was just agreed towards the end for those reasons. And I think quite a few of the others were the same, because you also found when you get towards the end of the season, they've used up all their budget.
Right.
Start asking for more money at the end, and so a lot of it was to do with that. I seem to remember, but it wasn't unique to me.
Okay, so what did you do then when you left?
So I sort of DJ'd for a bit, but nothing sort of serious full time. I think I realised I need to go and get another job. I mean, I was always doing bits of work in between Grange Hill anyway, just to support myself financially. You know, when you're 18 and 19, you're not working for 6 months of the year. You have to go and do other stuff. But I actually started doing agency work. I was doing a bit of anything and everything. Ended up working in factories and got a forklift license. I was driving a forklift for a while. Then got bored of doing labouring work and decided to go and work in an office. So I started doing call centre type work and things like that. All the while I've been teaching myself IT. I mean, I was even quite keen on computers when I was doing Grange Hill, because a lot of time in the rehearsal block you could hang out with the crew and sit in their offices, and I'd sort of sit and help them do design flyers and things like that. So I always had a bit of a flair for IT. But yeah, then I ended up having my own company for a while, sort of doing local computer repairs. Ended up getting a job working for a company as an operations manager and IT manager, and then moved into fortunate enough to find a role where I moved into a high technology company, looking after their IT. They did all sorts of things like helicopters and aircraft, energy, defense electronics, all that kind of stuff. And then from there, I ended up moving into cybersecurity, because I think that was at the point where it started to become something that was big, that companies were waking up that they needed. So working doing cybersecurity for sort of government and banks and defense companies and satellite communications and that kind of stuff. And it was always a bit of a passion. So absolutely loving it. Yeah. So I kind of always knew if I wasn't going to do acting, it was going to be something in music or something in IT. I think for a little while I had my own music studio at home and sort of dabbled making some stuff. Natalie Tapper at the time came and did some recordings for me. She had a phenomenal voice. So still got those somewhere. Probably even more precious now. But yeah, since then I've just been working doing cybersecurity and absolutely loving it. So
you're still doing that now, yeah?
Life is good. Yeah, still on the up. Brilliant. So yeah, working for a large bank at the moment, looking after all their cybersecurity.
Brilliant. Okay. Now you mentioned this a little bit earlier on, but are you still in touch with any of the cast?
Not for a while. I mean, I know Kevin gave me a shout out. I'm remiss, he actually did leave his details at my brother's pie and mash shop, brother-in-law's pie and mash shop, and I don't think. I think the last time I spoke to Kevin was maybe even up the MySpace days.
Right. Wow.
But oddly, yeah, the people that I had spoken to from Grange Hill was because talking to them through other people that I knew. So Natalie I stayed in touch with because she was good friends of a guy that I went to school with who moved up to my local area. So we ended up speaking to her. I worked with a lady not too long ago who's really good friends with Francesca. So we sort of exchanged messages a while. But since I've gone off Facebook, I've just don't. I mean, you've seen my Twitter account. I'm not exactly obvious, right? So
no, it's not.
Yeah, sadly not. And I would like to. I mean, if there was an opportunity to, I would. It's often, sort of, unfortunately, a lot of these reunions end up falling on days that I can't do, or can be a bit of a thing to travel now, because I've moved quite far out of London. But would love to. And it's great. This is why this show you do is so good, because it's so good to hear their voices again, and definitely great to hear someone that have made great. I mean, Kevin obviously he's had I think he won. I think out of all of us, he's had a career and what he wanted to do. But yeah, good to hear Amy's doing the director work, and everyone seems to be sort of back in the groove of normal life now. Darren doing cab driving and all that kind of stuff. So this is why this is great for me. But yeah, I would absolutely love to get together. Although, as you can probably tell, I don't remember a lot of what happened. Not sure what we'll talk about.
I'll be honest. From what you've said to me, your memory's better than some people that have been on here. Don't worry about that.
Oh, really?
Okay then. So, Steve, we are coming towards the end, and it's the same few questions that I always ask at the end of every episode. So, the Grange Hill movie has been talked about a lot recently. What do you think of the idea of a Grange Hill movie?
I suppose it's a good idea. I mean, there's obviously a big missing demographic of people that are probably under 20 that probably were never around when Grange Hill was on the telly. So it must be sort of appealing to the original fans. So I'm assuming it's going to be probably slightly more gritty than you'd put on at 5:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon or in the evening. But yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, obviously there's still a great following for it. I've seen some of the responses and following you get on the channels, and the work that you do. So that I think it all depends how it's executed. Isn't it somebody that was a former cast?
Yeah, Sarah Sugarman was in the early series. Amazing director, and she played Jess Samuels very, very early on. She's going to be directing it. Phil Redmond's written it. So so it could be.
Involved. Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. So, and if you were asked,
I'll definitely watch it.
would we see a return of Dudley Wesker if you were asked?
I would say never say never. It depends on the schedule. I've obviously got a day job now. As long as they won't have a meeting at bins or anything, then I'd probably consider it. But I think with the limited time that they would have to shoot that, I think Dudley would be right down the bottom. In fact, I'm surprised you're interviewing me now, because there's so many other people that you haven't, I was figuring you were going to move on to the crew after this.
No. Don't be putting yourself down there, and definitely don't be putting Dudley down either. Yeah. Okay then. So, other than Dudley, who was your favourite character on Grange Hill?
I think at the time my favourite character, once I realised I was going to be in it, I started watching it a bit more, and I think at the time, Ray, like Kelly George's character, was just great comedy role, great comedy timing. He had that sort of charisma and personality. Not a role that I could have played at all, but he was certainly my favourite character at the time, I think, coming into it. And Justine as well, obviously. Yeah. Justine was everyone's favourite.
Yeah, she was, yeah. And if you couldn't have played Dudley, was there any other character you would have liked to have played then?
Like I say, I didn't watch it a great deal to know, but I mean, from my experience with it, I was always quite envious of Jamie and Alan's character, because they always seemed to be doing the cool stuff. I was just there as a kind of comic relief. Like, there's a lot of stuff when I would look at the storylines that Alan played, the whole thing with the wheelchair piece, and I think that would have been really, as someone that was interested in acting, that would have been a really good role to play. But not jealous in any way, but I think always at the time would have thought I'd prefer to your character than mine.
Brilliant. Okay, then sort of the final question, Steve, is why do you think then there is still such affection for Grange Hill?
I mean, it was probably a huge part of people's childhoods, right? I think, some of the emotional storylines and things, I think, people genuinely got into it. It wasn't just a background TV show. And I think even to the point I've made, the experience I've got was a large percentage of the fans actually thought it was a real school.
Yeah.
This was like a sort of real favourite of kids at the time. So I do think it's all about nostalgia. I mean, I'm surprised if, I was in the show and I can't remember what happened 30 years ago, that there are fans that still can.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does amaze me. I don't get recognised much these days. I mean, interestingly, I was in a previous town that I lived in. I went to pick up a parcel, and I went to the post office. The guy was working there, and he went, "Oh, when I saw the name on his parcel, I was wondering if it'd be you."
Right.
And I was like, I mean, the fact that I even remembered my full name, I was quite blown away by it. And actually, even now, if Twitter and things were around when I was doing Grange Hill, I think I might have had a different attitude to the character, because I think a lot of the feedback you would get would just be through fans, right? So it was or people that liked the program, or people at school, right? So it was often quite hostile, but I did get a couple of nice fan letters, and I think some people felt the character really did touch them and made them feel less weird and quirky at school. It was nice to know those things went on. But actually, since the days of Facebook and things, I've had nothing but nice messages from previous fans. And my mum, bless her, likes to sort of monitor the old Grange Hill discussion forums on Facebook and let me know and everyone else know every time they mention my character or Laura's. But it just seems there's a great affection for it. Still a lot of great feedback. It'd be interesting to see. I mean, the interesting thing, going back to the film, is if you're going to have it so that you've got a bunch of people that were probably school age in the 70s now watching a film that's about a bunch of school kids today. I don't know whether that would have the same thing. I wonder if they're going to sort of try and play to the same audience, whether they're going to try and show that. I don't know, but yeah, people do still love it.
Brilliant. Okay, well, Steve, it's been great talking to you. It's been really, really, really good to hear your experiences about your time on the program. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Neil. It means a lot. I mean, I want to thank you for all the work that you do. Obviously, just the discussions we had earlier, the amount of research and time you put into this is incredible, really. And I think, just for me, from a personal point of view, just as I said, being able to hear old friends and hear what they're doing again. So, really grateful for what you do, and I'll be an avid listener to any upcoming podcast. Probably not this one, though.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, well, no, once again, thanks very much for coming on, Steve. And to anyone that's listening, I'll speak to you next time. Cheers. Thanks. Bye-bye.